it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen.
I'm a deep-sea explorer for the government, by Augustus Cordoba. Part 1. The pier stretched out into black water, the harbour lights barely touching the edges of it. I stood at the far end, wind clawing at my coat, watching the crew move with quiet efficiency as they loaded gear onto the most expensive submarine I'd ever seen outside a restricted naval yard. The Blackwater Sentinel looked like it belonged in another world. Predatory lines, skin of reinforced titanium that swallowed the light and threw it back in muted, dangerous glints. Not the work of a shipbuilder, no, the work of an engineer who expected the ocean to fight back. It had been 3 weeks since the encrypted email slid into my inbox. Sender untraceable, nothing but a mess of random characters. Well, the offer was blunt. $100,000 for a 2-week deep-sea research run, expenses covered. The kind of money that could vaporize my student loans and buy me time to breathe. My advisor didn't hesitate to call it career suicide, though. Sarah, you don't answer ghosts on the internet. That's how people disappear. Well, maybe so, but my research funding was dying. My debts weren't, and the message had been too specific to ignore. Coordinates, departure time, bring personal dive gear, 2 weeks at sea, no mention of the work itself, no list of objectives, just a single, loaded sentence at the end. Deep waters hold deep secrets. Yeah, I should have trashed it. Instead, I dug and I found something that made my skin prickle. Coordinates dropped dead center into a section of the Pacific I'd never seen on any research chart. Too far from shipping lanes, too deep for commercial work. A place the ocean kept for itself. Bootsteps thudded down the gangway, measured, heavy and unhurried. The man who emerged looked like he'd been carved from salt and steel. Weathered skin, storm-grey beard, eyes narrowed into permanent squints from years of staring into sun glare and sea spray. He carried himself like he'd been standing on moving decks since before I was born. You're Hartshorn. Not a question. Yeah, that's me, Sarah Hartshorn, marine biology. My hand went out before I could think better of it. His handshake was short, iron hard, and the kind that didn't leave room for doubt. Captain Mark Ramprakash, you're the last aboard. He turned without another word, moving back toward the ship with the steady confidence of a man who knew exactly what waited out there. I followed, my boots ringing on the steel gangway. The deck was a study in precision. Ropes coiled like they'd been measured. Surfaces scrubbed to a flat, non-reflective sheen. No stray glimmers, no loose ends. A ship ready for the deep and for whatever might be waiting in it. Well, hell of a setup, I muttered, running my hand along the railing. The metal was cold and solid under my fingers, like it could take a hit from a freight train and shrug it off. It better be, Mark said without looking back. We're headed where most ships wouldn't last an hour. He stopped at a reinforced door that had to be the bridge entrance. Your quarters are below deck. Third door left. Galley's at the end of the corridor. We'll do introductions once we're moving. He turned to go and then paused, his voice dropping low. When Hartshorn, whatever you think you signed up for, forget it. This isn't a university cruise. I opened my mouth to ask what that meant, but he was already gone, swallowed by the bridge. A second later, the deep, steady growl of engines rolled up through the deck plates, and I knew we'd be leaving whether I had answers or not. Below deck, it didn't feel like any research vessel I'd ever stepped foot on. The place was more like a classified lab hidden inside a warship. White LED strips hummed along the corridor, glinting off sleek, sealed consoles and racks of gear I couldn't identify. The air was too clean, with that faint metallic bitter tang of a life support system scrubbing harder than it should have to. My cabin was compact but deliberate. Narrow bunk bolted to the bulkhead, desk flush with the wall, storage lockers that sealed with electronic keypads. On the desk sat a printed ship's manifest. 8 crew. Most of the names meant nothing, but one jumped out. Caitlin Anderson. I knew her work, Groundbreaking research on deep-sea microorganisms. I stashed my gear, locked the compartment, and followed the smell of coffee to the galley. A woman with cropped brown hair stood at the counter, moving like someone who'd been doing this for years. Efficient, exact. She glanced up, appraising me in a single sweep. "Oh, you must be the new biologist," she said. "Sarah Hartshorn. I know your work on deep-sea bacteria. Exceptional." She didn't smile, just poured another cup without asking and slid it toward me. "Thanks, so I don't get why they'd need 2 marine biologists for this run." "2?" Her eyes lifted. Manifest's got me down as the microbiologist, but my background's broad. I cover general marine biology too. She leaned back against the counter, studying me like she was trying to read the fine print on my soul. "How much did they tell you about this mission?" "Almost nothing." "Same." She sipped her coffee. 3 weeks ago I got this email. Coordinates, departure time, payment. No objectives, no methodology. No clue who's actually running the show. Well, my department head thought I'd lost it. Mine too. The deck shifted under our feet as the ship began to slide away from the dock. Through the small porthole, the harbor lights drifted past and into the dark. Whatever was ahead, there was no walking away now. "You, met the rest of the crew?" I asked. "Some. Mostly engineers. And a couple of guys I can't place. No idea what they do. Feels like everyone's on a need-to-know basis." Caitlin set her cup down with a muted thud. "Oh, and the captain's not exactly big on small talk." "I noticed," I said. "Real people person. Asked him about the research protocols this morning. Told me I'd find out when we, hit depth." He paused mid-sip. Whatever the hell that means. The low hum of the engine shifted. A deeper growl now, and I felt the deck tilt slightly as the ship swung toward open water. The protective cradle of the harbor was behind us. Out here, the swells would have their say. "Yeah, this equipment," I said. "Some of it looks like it belongs in a classified lab." "Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Those pressure suits alone could buy my apartment building." She topped up her coffee, eyes narrowing slightly. "Yeah, makes you wonder who's really signing the checks for this trip." But before I could reply, the ship's intercom crackled alive, carrying Mark's voice, steady and hard-edged. "All crew to main deck. Briefing in 5 minutes." Oh, Caitlin and I traded a look. Finally. The main deck had been stripped and reassembled into a meeting space. Folding chairs in a rough circle, the kind of setup that didn't invite comfort. 7 others were already seated when we arrived. 6 men and 1 woman I hadn't seen before. Well, the engineers were obvious. Weathered hands, sun-cracked faces, work clothes that had seen real labor. The others were harder to place. Mark stood dead center, 1 manila envelope in each hand. He changed into a dark blue uniform that sharpened him. More command presence now, more military. "Well, we're 2 hours out of San Diego," he said, voice carrying easily over the rumble of the ship. "Our heading's locked onto coordinates stored into the nav system. Destination, roughly 1,200 miles southwest, international waters." He stepped forward, passing an envelope to each of us. "These hold your mission assignments. Do not open them until I give the order." I turned mine over. My name printed on a plain white label, no title, no rank. The seal was a strip of tamper-proof tape. "What's the research objective?" asked one of the engineers, a man with calloused hands and graying temples. "Deep-sea sample collection," Mark said without missing a beat. "Geological and biological specimens from the target depth. Your envelope contains the specifics for your station." Caitlin leaned forward, her tone light but her eyes sharp. How deep are we talking?" Mark's gaze locked on hers for a long, uncomfortable moment. "Deeper than any of you have been before." "That's not an answer," I said. "Well, it's the only one you're getting." Mark's tone made it clear the conversation was dead. "We'll reach coordinates in roughly 18 hours. Get some rest. Learn the ship's layout. prep your gear. Questions about your assignments can wait until you've read them. He turned to leave, but then stopped. One more thing. This is a closed mission. No contact with the outside world until we're back in port. Radios are for emergencies only. What about check-ins with our institutions? Asked the woman I hadn't met yet. Handled, Mark said flatly. Your supervisors know you'll be unreachable for the duration. He stepped toward the bridge entrance. Dinner's at 1900. Another briefing in the morning. The meeting broke apart fast, crew scattering in different directions, sealed envelopes clutched in their hands. I caught Caitlin's eye and tilted my head toward the stern. She fell in behind me without a word. The harbor was long gone now, just a weak glow on the far horizon. Around us, black water stretched in every direction, swallowing the last hints of land. The engines throbbed beneath our boots, pushing us towards coordinates I couldn't find on any chart that mattered. This whole thing stinks, Caitlin said under her breath. Professional expeditions don't run like this. Well, I know, but the money's real and so's the gear. I held up the sealed envelope. Well, maybe once we read these, the pieces will fit together. Maybe, she said, eyes on the endless dark. Or maybe we just made the biggest mistake of our careers. I didn't have a reply. The ship held its steady course toward a patch of ocean no one talked about, carrying a number of strangers bound by the same shadowy offer. Whatever was waiting for us out there in the deep, we'd meet it together, or not at all. Hours bled away. The steady hum of the engines became a heartbeat underfoot. The shore was just a memory now. I sat in front of the monitor, eyes locked on the depth gauge as the numbers ticked downward. 18 hours since we'd left the harbor. Well, Mark's voice finally crackled over the intercom. Begin dive sequence. The sealed envelope sat on the desk behind me, still untouched. His orders had been specific. Wait until we were at depth. And now as the ship slid into the mouth of the trench, that moment was finally closing in. The ship thrummed around me, a steady controlled heartbeat of steel and circuitry. Banks of monitors glowed in the dim light, spitting out endless data streams, hull pressure, oxygen mist, water temperature, tracking our slow, deliberate plunge through the layers of the ocean. This was the part I'd always loved about deep-sea work, the careful descent into realms most people would never see, each pressure zone a new chapter in the planet's oldest, darkest story. The external cameras still showed the pale, shifting blue-green of the upper ocean, sunlight reaching down in fractured columns. An underwater cathedral, quiet and sacred. But as we slipped past 3,000 feet into the twilight zone, something felt off. The water looked wrong. I'd made dozens of dives through this depth during my grad work. The twilight zone was supposed to come alive with bioluminescence, jellies throbbing with electric pulses, lanternfish blazing constellations in the dark, siphonophores dragging glittering veils through the current. Well, down here, the water usually threw its own light show, rivaling anything humans had ever built. But now, nothing. No flickers, no movement, just endless black, swallowing the camera's range like we were sinking through molten glass. Caitlin, I called across the equipment bay. She was bent over her sampling station, calibrating her scope. She looked up. Yeah? You're seeing this, yeah? There's nothing out there. No bioluminescence, nothing. Caitlin walked over, flicking through camera feeds. Her frown deepened with each angle. That's unusual. Even in dead zones, you see something. Vertical migration, scattered plankton, but this. The sonar operator, James, swiveled in his chair. We're getting odd returns. Contacts flash on for a second, then vanish. I moved over to his station. The screen lit up with ghost traces, blips big enough to be whales, others fast and small, darting through the scan. When the suite came back over the same coordinates, the targets were gone. Equipment glitch? I asked. James shook his head. Ran a full diagnostic before descent. Everything's clean. He tapped at the controls, changing the range. Well, the ghosts kept appearing and then disappearing. It's like, he said slowly, there's something out there that doesn't want to be tracked. The ship's intercom broke in with a crackle, and Mark's voice rolled out low and firm. All stations report status. We're approaching 5,000 feet. One by one, the crew checked in. Engineering, green across the board. Navigation, on course. Hull integrity, perfect. Every system behaving exactly as it should. Which somehow made the black, empty water pressing against the hull feel even more hostile. Part 2. Caitlin slid back to her station and deployed the first collection probe. The mechanical arm uncoiled from the hull with insect-like precision, its camera feed giving us a close, clinical view as it drew water into a sterile chamber. On screen, the sample looked exactly as it should. Clear, cold, deep ocean water with the usual scattering of microscopic debris drifting in the current. She transferred it into the analysis bay, slid it under the microscope, and bent over the eyepiece. I expected the usual look of focused curiosity that came with her work. Instead, her brows pulled together, her mouth tightening. "Sarah," she said, her voice lower now. "Come here." I stepped up beside her. "What do you got?" "Just look." I leaned into the eyepiece, adjusted the focus, and then froze. The water I'd just seen as clear seconds ago was now inky black, as if someone had bled ink into it. But it wasn't uniform. Threads of darkness drifted like smoke underwater, curling and twisting in deliberate patterns that felt alive. "Contamination?" I asked, though I'd seen her sterilize every tool. That was my first thought. She moved to the second scope, where she'd prepped a control sample with distilled water from the lab's own stores. But look at this. The control was pristine, crystal clear, untouched. Whatever was happening, it wasn't coming from the ship. Run another pull," I told her. The sampling arm slid out again, dipping into the black void at 6,000 feet. The feed showed the probe filling with perfectly normal seawater before retracting, locking with a soft metallic click we could feel through the deck plates. At first, the new sample looked clean. Then, within 3 minutes of sitting in the lab's atmosphere, the change began. Slow at first, then accelerating. Black filaments bled through the container like veins in flesh, weaving and merging until the water inside was nothing but liquid shadow. "This doesn't make sense," Caitlin muttered, scanning the readouts. "Chemistry's normal. Salinity, minerals, everything. On paper, it's deep water, but optically?" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Well, it's becoming something else." The intercom burst to life once more, Mark's voice cutting through the tension. "Passing 10,000 feet. Engineering, report electrical status." Robert, the engineer's voice, came back from the deck below. "Minor fluctuations in the auxiliary grid. Nothing critical, but..." He hesitated. "Well, we're picking up odd spikes in the magnetic field readings." I glanced at the depth gauge. Yep, 10,000 feet. We were deep in the bathyal zone now, a world without light, where pressure would pulp an unprotected human in milliseconds. The external cameras showed nothing but black water, the void punched through by the ship's powerful LED arrays. "James," I called, "still seeing those phantom sonar hits?" He gave a tight nod. "More of them, bigger. Some readouts matched the mass of blue whales, but the movement patterns..." He hesitated. "Well, they don't match anything alive." "What kind of movement?" "Perfect geometry. Straight lines, right angles, tight formations. Like they're coordinating." The air in the equipment bay felt colder, though the climate control still hummed steadily. I checked the temperature feeds, and then my stomach clenched. Well, the readings were spiking wildly. 1 second, the expected near-freezing deep water temperatures. The next, heat levels that had no business existing down here. "Caitlin, you're getting these temp anomalies." She glanced at her monitor and then stared harder. That's wrong. Spikes up to 40 degrees Celsius. Down here? That'd mean massive geothermal activity or equipment failure, I finished. She shook her head, though. Not when multiple independent sensors saying the same thing. Her fingers flicked across the console. And look, pressure fluctuations too, but they're not tied to the temperature shifts. It's like the water around us is unstable. Meanwhile, the ship kept sinking. 15,000 feet. 20,000. Crew chatter over the intercom had gone quieter now. Every transmission edged with the kind of calm people use when they're trying to not admit they're worried. The minor electrical anomalies were no longer so minor. Corridor lights flickered. Systems hiccuped and demanded reboots more often. The engineers were still using professional voices, but they weren't hiding the concern in them. Robert's voice cut in from engineering. We're seeing fluctuations in the main grid. Recommend slowing descent until we nail this down. But Mark's reply came back flat, unshaken. Descent continues as scheduled. Run diagnostics on secondary systems. I traded a look with Caitlin. Protocol was clear. You didn't push deeper with unresolved electrical faults. 25,000 feet, little problems turned into hull-cracking disasters. I keyed the intercom. Captain Ramprakash, this is Hartshorn. We've got significant malfunctions in the lab systems. Recommend halting descent until we can assess. Static hissed for a few seconds before his voice returned, low and final. All stations maintain current operations. We're behind schedule. Behind schedule for what? Our sealed envelope still sat unopened. The real objective of this mission was still a mystery. But something in Mark's tone told me he was answering to pressures none of us understood. At 25,000 feet, the ship's external lights began to flicker. The LED arrays, our only sight into the abyss, dimmed and flared in uneven pulses, painting the black water in stuttering flashes. Shadows drifted across the viewports, moving in ways that didn't match our motion. I kept my eyes on the external camera feeds, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The shadows didn't act like shadows, though. They curled and twisted through the black water as if alive, sliding away from our lights in directions that made no physical sense. James, I called, are your sonar hits matching these movements? He didn't answer right away. The pale glow from his displays lit his face, turning it ghostly. They're everywhere now, all around us. But the returns are wrong, way wrong. It's like the signal's getting swallowed instead of bouncing back. On my console, the temperature feed still lurched between the impossible. Sudden thermal spikes that would have boiled surface water flared and vanished. No source, no logic. The pressure readings jumped too, wild shift you'd only expect if the seabed was heaving beneath us. Yet the mapping systems showed nothing. Sarah? Caitlin's voice was tight. You need to see this. She was staring at one of the collection chambers. The black mass inside wasn't just drifting anymore. It was moving. Not like stirred liquid, like something with intent. It pushed and coiled against the container walls, testing them. That's not possible, I said. I know. Her hands trembled as she worked the microscope controls. But it's reacting. When I tap the glass, it moves toward it. Shine a light and it pulls back. The thing pressed harder against the chamber wall, tendrils forming and dissolving, probing the seal in deliberate, almost methodical motions. It wasn't random. It wasn't mindless. It was thinking. 30,000 feet. Mark's voice broke in over the intercom. All stations prepare for final descent phase. As if those words flipped a switch, the ship erupted in alarms. Pressure warnings, electrical fault klaxons, temperature alerts, systems in different sectors all failing at once, like something had reached into the ship and started tearing pieces out. Then the radio spat static and died. The comm link to the surface was gone. We were blind, cut off. alone in the crushing dark with 30,000 feet of black water above us, and something moving in it. The silence was absolute, except for the rasp of our own breathing and the rising chorus of system alarms bleeding through the ship. We were alone at 30,000 feet, wrapped in water that mocked every rule of deep-sea physics. Our equipment was dying in ways no manual could explain, and something black and calculating was still moving inside the samples we'd stolen from the abyss. I gripped the edge of the console as another cascade of failures rolled across the displays. 30 minutes since the radio had gone dead, and the Blackwater Sentinel was rotting from the inside out. Navigation was the first to give up the ghost. 1 second Mark was locked on our descent coordinates. The next, he was staring at dead screens that ignored every command. His hands moved faster, jabbing keys like he could will them back to life. "Manual navigation only," he ground out, but the edge in his voice was new. The certainty that had carried him since San Diego was now cracking. Then the pressure sensors went. Steady readouts replaced by pulsing red errors. A few minutes later, the depth gauges followed. Now we had no idea where we were in the water column. 35,000 feet? 50. The weight pressing down on us was no longer measurable. Caitlin left her microscope and slid into the backup navigation console, trying to pull anything useful from systems that were shutting down faster than we could name them. The emergency lighting threw her face into a pale, flickering mask. "All integrity sensors offline," she reported. "Sonar's dead. We're blind." The backup generators kicked in with a deep mechanical whine that shuddered through the hull. Red emergency lights spilled across the control room, stretching our shadows into long, twitching silhouettes on the walls. The bright white LEDs that made the ship feel like a lab were gone, replaced with the hell glow of a vessel in crisis. That's when the hull began to speak. Low, heavy groans rolled down the corridors, metal under stress, but wrong somehow. Not the expected creaks of a deep-sea hull. It was other, a sound with weight to it, a sound that felt like it was answering something outside. Deep-sea vessels were built to endure crushing pressure, hulls designed to flex and compress within limits, every seam engineered to hold. But these sounds weren't the usual creaks of steel under load. They were irregular, unpredictable, sharp groans and low aching sighs that seemed to come from random points along the hull, as if something outside was pressing in different places, testing us. James was hunched over his engineering station, structural diagrams flashing and vanishing as the ship's systems failed one after another. "These readings are wrong," he muttered. I stepped closer. "Wrong how?" "The stress patterns don't match our depth. Pressure distribution's uneven. It's like, He hesitated, glancing at me. "It's like something's pushing against the hull in spots, hard, while the rest stays untouched. This isn't uniform deep water pressure." Robert's voice bled in over the failing intercom from below decks. "Captain, we've got faults in the main power grid. Generators are cycling on and off on their own. Can't hold stable output for critical systems." Mark answered with clipped control, though the strain was there. "Life support, keep it on, and ballast control online too, whatever it takes." The ship answered with another groan, deeper this time, a metallic exhalation that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The red emergency lighting sputtered, dropped us into total black for 2 long seconds, then flared back. In that darkness, the silence was absolute. Only our breathing and the distant dying heartbeat of machinery remained. "How deep are we?" Caitlin asked quietly, already knowing no one could give her certainty. "Depth charges suggest we passed 35,000 feet before the sensors failed," Mark said. "That was 20 minutes ago." As if the ocean had been waiting for that confession, the final collapse came. Every system died at once. The red lights vanished. Air circulation cut out. Screens went blank. Even the tiny backup indicators, those meant to survive anything, were gone. We were swallowed into total darkness and silence so complete it felt like being buried alive. I reached for the console beside me, my fingertips brushing warm metal, still holding the last ghost of heat from the electronics that had just died. Well, it felt like touching the corpse of a great machine. Around me, the others shifted cautiously, their breaths short and deliberate. "Yeah, anyone have a flashlight?" Caitlin's voice drifted from somewhere to my left. Emergency lighting should have kicked in," James said flatly. "Even in total systems failure, the battery circuit stays alive." But nothing answered him. We hung suspended in the crushing black, sealed inside a dead machine that no longer answered to human hands. The only sounds were our own voices and the occasional deep, shifting groan of the hull as it adjusted to forces we could neither measure nor predict. Part 3. Minutes bled into hours. The emergency air supply kicked in on its own. Somewhere inside the walls, oxygen mixing valves hissed to life, a cold mechanical whisper in the dark. But no lights came with it. The air carried the sharp metallic tang of the emergency reserves, a taste that told you exactly how little stood between survival and suffocation. Time warped without light or clocks. I caught myself counting my breaths to mark the minutes. The others shifted now and then, their faint movements the only proof I wasn't alone in this black tomb. Then I heard it, hyperventilating. Rapid, shallow gasps, soaring at the silence like teeth on bone. Panic, raw and contagious. I thought it was one of the engineers, but in this absolute dark, voices had no direction. They came from everywhere and nowhere. "Slow your breathing." Mark's voice, low but edged with command. "Emergency air is limited. Stay calm." But calm was a lie down here. Calm didn't exist 30,000 feet down, entombed in a powerless sub where the ocean could crush you like an eggshell. And the ship spoke again, long aching groans, metal flexing against pressures our dead senses could no longer track. Every sound was a question. Was this the one that split the hull? I tried to anchor my thoughts in the practical. How long could the emergency tanks keep us breathing? Did ballast have enough manual override that worked without power? Could anyone even hear a distress call from this depth? Every answer led to the same truth. Without power, we were prey. The hyperventilating quickened. In the dark, I heard someone groping their way toward the sound, maybe trying to help, but the gasps didn't stop. The darkness made every breath sound amplified, every whispered word magnified, until the air itself felt like it was pressing in. 4 hours, maybe 5. I stopped counting my own breathing and started listening to the hull instead, learning its slow rhythm, the deep creaks and reluctant sighs that meant it was still holding, a mechanical heartbeat keeping us alive. And then, without warning, without so much as a flicker, every system surged back at once. The white light hit me like a lightning strike. Emergency displays flared awake, harsh and clinical after so long in blackness, flooding the compartments with brutal illumination. I threw an arm over my face, blinded by the blast of white light after hours entombed in black. Around me the others flinched, muttered curses, hands coming up to shield against the glare. The hum of electronics blared back into the air, the steady thrum of circulation fans chasing away the suffocating silence that had pressed against us for so long. "What the hell?" Caitlin muttered, blinking hard at the instrument panels like she wasn't sure they were real. I lowered my hand slowly, letting my eyes adjust. Well, the ship looked untouched. Corridors clean, displays humming, every panel alive and bright. 6 hours erased like they'd never happened. Mark was already planted at the navigation console, scanning status readouts with the intensity of someone who just clawed his way out of a coffin. "All systems green," he said, voice flat but edged. "Power normal. Life support stable. Hull integrity intact." James twisted in his seat, disbelief plain in his voice. "That's impossible. The main generators were dead. You don't bring them back from that kind of total failure without tearing half the systems apart and rebuilding them. I don't know, Mark said, already moving to the external camera controls. Let's see where we are. The big display flickered, then bled into a live feed from the hull-mounted cameras. No one spoke. We'd hit the bottom. The ocean floor stretched into the dark in every direction, caught in the hard white cone of our floodlights. But it wasn't the jagged rock and sediment plains the maps had promised. No, the seafloor was smothered in a thick layer of black sludge, dense, oily, restless. It moved. Rolled in slow, deliberate waves that had nothing to do with any current. Breathing, rising and falling in a rhythm too steady to alive. Something massive was sleeping under us. The cameras swept across the landscape and the sludge reacted, shying away from the light in some places, slithering toward it in others. Tendrils uncoiled from the surface, curling upward through the water like probing fingers. They pressed against our hull, tracing it, learning it. We'd found what had been poisoning our samples and killing our instruments on the way down, and it knew we were here. Caitlin stepped to the sample collection controls, moving with her usual precision, but her hands betrayed her, just a slight tremor as she brought the robotic arm online. The external cameras locked onto the mechanical arm as it slid out from the hull, its collection chamber glinting under the harsh glare of our LEDs. The sludge reacted instantly. What had been a slow, lazy mass coating the ocean floor came alive, writhing like a nest of black serpents disturbed from hibernation. Tendrils uncoiled and snaked toward the probe, wrapping around it with a defensive strength that looked less like resistance and more like aggression. For a moment, I thought we'd lose the arm entirely. Caitlin kept working the controls, though, forcing the probe deeper into the shifting muck. The LEDs caught the oily sheen of the substance as it flexed and writhed against the intrusion. Finally, the chamber sealed. The tendrils loosened their grip like something beaten but unwilling to admit defeat, retreating in a slow, reluctant ripple that looked almost resentful. "Got it," Caitlin said. No triumph in her tone, just the tight, brittle sound of someone trying to pretend this was routine. She moved the sealed chamber to her workstation and began prepping a microscope slide with mechanical precision. I stayed at my station, eyes darting between her hands and the shifting patterns on the camera feeds. Outside, the sludge still rolled across the seabed, but it was moving differently now. Not random, not drifting. It was repositioning, drawing itself subtly around us, hemming us in. Caitlin bent to the eyepiece, turning the focus knob with quick, tense movements. I'd seen her go through this ritual dozens of times already. Normally she was composed and clinical. Now her shoulders were tight and her posture rigid. Then, sharp intake of breath, the kind that makes your skin crawl before you even know why. "What is it?" I asked, stepping closer. She didn't answer, not right away. She adjusted the magnification and checked again, then again. Her knuckles had gone white against the focus controls. "Caitlin?" She lifted her head at last, and the look in her eyes stopped me cold. A strange, impossible marriage of scientific wonder and pure horror. "It's not just alive," she whispered. "It's organized, structured, like there are patterns in here that look like..." Well. Her words cut off. She stumbled back from the microscope like it had struck her, chair rolling away. Her finger rose, shaking, to point at the sample container. Inside, the sludge was moving, not drifting like before, not swirling at random. It was thinking. The thing in the container pressed itself against the glass, flattening, then sprouting tendrils that crept along the inside like questing fingers. They traced every curve and seam, feeling for weaknesses, searching for a way out. The black mass slid upward against the walls, ignoring gravity like it was nothing, clinging to the vertical surface until it reached the top, probing, tugging, before letting itself fall back down to begin again. "That's not possible," I muttered, even as I watched it unfold inches from my face. Moved with purpose now, The tendrils twitched into intricate designs, tight spirals echoing the double helix, sharp-edged geometric lattices like crystal growth, webworks of branching filaments that pulsed with darker threads like blood in veins. For fleeting seconds, it mimicked the wiring of a living brain. And then, almost as if it knew we were watching, the sludge outside began to shift. The external cameras caught the first signs. Vast sheets of black matter peeling themselves off the sea floor and rising in unison. These weren't the lazy rolls we'd seen earlier. They were deliberate, coordinated movements, the sludge heaving upward into immense walls that stretched beyond the limits of our floodlights. They loomed over us like mountains of liquid night. The first impact came without warning. A wave of solid darkness slammed into the Blackwater Sentinel's hull with a shuddering boom that rattled every bolt in her frame. Caitlin and I staggered, grabbing for handholds. This wasn't the slow push of ocean current. It was a strike. A test. "Captain," I barked into the intercom, "we're taking direct hits from the mass out there. Recommend immediate ascent." Mark's reply came through in jagged bursts, the audio choked with static. "Trying to activate. Ballast. Controls malfunctioning." Another hit, harder than the first, slammed us sideways. The hull howled under the pressure. Several of the external lights winked out, leaving gaping blind spots on the monitors. What the remaining cameras showed us turned my stomach. We were surrounded. The sludge had risen fully now, curling over us, sealing us inside a living dome of black water and alien flesh. The last fragments of open ocean were gone. "Emergency ascent protocols," Mark ordered, his voice clipped and urgent. "All hands prepare for rapid decompression sequence." But when he hit the controls, nothing happened. No hiss of valves, no shift in ballast. Every button, every lever, every sequence of commands met the same dead, silent refusal. It was like the ballast system wasn't even connected to the ship anymore, like something had cut the heartstrings between our controls and the machines that kept us alive. Oh, the interference was worsening by the minute. Static crawled across the monitor displays, distorting readouts into meaningless noise. The lights above us throbbed in erratic pulses, bright, dim, bright again, mimicking the unsettling rhythm of the black mass writhing outside our hull. And that's when I saw it. The first sign it had found a way in. A hair-thin ribbon of black was leaking through a ventilation grate high in the equipment bay. The vent should have been locked down tight, triple-sealed, pressure-rated, shielded against any intrusion. But the sludge was ignoring all of that, sliding through like the barriers weren't even there. "Caitlin," I said, my voice low and taut. "Look up." She followed my stare and froze. Stuff was dripping from the vent now, but it didn't fall like water. Each droplet twisted in midair, crawling upward along the walls instead of down. It spread in branching lines, moving with an unnatural deliberation, as if mapping the ship's interior. Then more points of invasion bloomed across the compartment. Thin threads forced themselves through door seals, oozing from hairline gaps around electrical conduits. A black bead pushed up from between the plates of the deck and began stretching itself into a crawling line. Within minutes, there were dozens of these points, each leaking its own trickle of the alien substance until the bay looked like it was being claimed from every direction at once. The intercom burst into life, Robert's voice jagged and panicked under a wash of static from engineering below. "Captain, we've got contamination down here. Black, coming through the bulkheads, burning through the metal like acid." "Can you contain it?" Mark's voice was strained, nearly swallowed by the distortion. "Negative. It's spreading too fast. We're seeing structural damage to... Hey, James is... The rest was cut off, replaced by dead air. Part 4. I snatched the internal comm handset, forcing my voice through clenched teeth. "Robert, Respond. James, answer me. But only static hissed back. The sludge in our compartment was moving faster now. Individual streams merged into dark, glossy pools that slid across the deck like predators on the hunt. They didn't obey gravity, didn't follow any slope or tilt of the ship. They moved where they wanted to move. The thing was hunting us now, no question. Thin, questing tendrils slid across the deck toward our boots, while the main mass shifted deliberately, cutting off the only exit like a predator herding prey. "We need to get out now," Caitlin hissed, edging backward toward the corridor that led to the upper decks. She made it to the doorway, then froze. Her breath hitched into a sharp, horrified gasp. The passage beyond was already ankle-deep in black. It rolled and swirled like liquid tar alive, flooding in from vents, seams, and cracks in the bulkheads. The ship's entire lower section was gone now, claimed. Then a sound rose from somewhere below that made my blood turn to ice. A scream, short, sharp, and final. Whatever caused it ended the life attached to it in less than a second. Another followed, longer, louder, then cut off just as suddenly. James, Robert, gone. The thing advancing toward us wasn't some mindless deep-sea anomaly we disturbed. No, this was a predator, ancient and calculating. It wasn't reacting to us, it was playing us, using our own ship against us, eating its way through every wall and wire, sealing every escape, leaving us with nowhere to go. The Blackwater Sentinel wasn't a research vessel anymore. It was a coffin, and whatever had been waiting at the bottom of the world was nailing it shut. Caitlin stood frozen at the doorway, staring at the ankle-deep tide of black outside. The sludge inside our bay quickened, streams converging into a united front that surged toward us in a coordinated assault. We had seconds, maybe less. "The safe room," I snapped, seizing her arm. "Upper deck, emergency chamber." We bolted for the maintenance ladder. Behind us came the sound of pursuit, a wet slithering rush as tendrils snaked forward across the deck like living ropes, grasping for our heels. The ladder rungs were slick with condensation. My hand slipped once, but I didn't stop. We climbed like the ship was on fire, the black substance chasing us upward. We burst onto the upper deck, where the ship's last-ditch emergency systems were housed, if they hadn't already been taken. The safe room sat buried in the ship's superstructure, a hardened capsule meant to keep a handful of survivors breathing during catastrophic hull breaches or onboard fires. I passed it during the tour, never thinking I'd actually set foot inside. Now, behind us, the black sludge boiled up through the hatch we'd just climbed like it was chasing a scent. It ignored gravity, streaming upward along bulkheads and crawling over the ceiling in defiance of everything I'd ever learned about fluid behavior. It branched into vein-like lattices, an expanding network of black capillaries probing every seam and world like it was reading the ship's anatomy. The safe room door loomed ahead, thick steel, layered and reinforced, its locking system brutally mechanical. No quick release here, just muscle and leverage. I threw my weight into the first wheel lock while Caitlin attacked the second. Metal groaned in protest, the grinding echo ringing down the corridor like a death knell. From deeper in the ship came voices, panicked shouts breathing through the hull's tortured creaks. I knew those voices. Tom from engineering, Lisa from navigation, both calling for help. Both cut off mid-scream, swallowed by silence that spoke of sudden, merciless ends. The sludge wasn't just coming for us. It was sweeping the ship like a predator clearing a nest, moving with cold precision, eliminating every living thing in its path. We shoved through the safe room threshold just as the first tendrils coiled into the corridor at our backs. I heaved the door shut, cranking the interior wheel lock until the steel clamped tight. Caitlin hit the emergency isolation system, and the hiss of pressurized air filled the cramped chamber as we cut ourselves off from the ship's corrupted atmosphere. The space was smaller than I remembered, barely enough room for 4 people to stand without pressing against each other. The walls were lined with survival kits, sealed water packs, compressed oxygen canisters, first aid kits, short-range comms. A single porthole broke the claustrophobic walls, its glass thick enough to withstand crushing depths. I pressed my face to it. Through the warp view, I saw Mark. The captain was wading through waist-deep sludge in the main corridor, every step a battle. The black mass clung to him like sentient tar, trying to drag him under, but he kept forcing his way forward toward the manual ballast controls. He moved with the grim resolve of a man who knew he had only one shot left, and that it probably wouldn't be enough. Caitlin pressed her face to the porthole beside me, her breath fogging the glass as she tracked Mark's grim progress. "He's going for the emergency systems," she murmured, voice tight with dread. The manual ballast release sat buried in a recessed panel near the ship's main comms hub. To reach it, Mark had to slog through that sludge that climbed higher with every step, the black mass rising like it knew exactly what he meant to do and was determined to stop him. "Come on," I whispered under my breath, knowing full well he couldn't hear me through the thick, sealed walls. Caitlin tore her gaze from the glass and moved toward the inner door, the one that linked to the main corridor. She punched at the controls with shaking hands. "What are you doing?" I grabbed her arm. "Don't open it. The sludge will get in here." Her eyes burned. "We can't just stand here and watch him die." Before I could stop her, she ripped free of my grip, hit the manual override, and stepped into the corridor beyond. The door cycled open, and the black sludge reacted instantly, surging toward the breach like a predator scenting blood. But Caitlin slapped the external seal shut before it could flood the safe room, trapping herself outside with it. Through the porthole, I watched her wade into the roiling black mire toward Mark. It swallowed her boots, and then her calves, climbing fast. The sludge wasn't random. It was hunting, closing on her with a single-minded will. She kept pushing forward, hand outstretched toward Mark as he fought his way to the ballast release. By the time she reached him, the sludge was at her waist. It surged higher, wrapping her legs and hips in a suffocating grip. Her scream punched through even the safe room's thick insulation, stabbing into my ears like a blade. I pressed my palms against the cold glass as if sheer will could tear her free. "Help me," she cried, locking eyes with me through the warped porthole glass. And the black mass climbed her torso, slow and deliberate, savoring the inevitable. Mark spun at the sound, saw her sinking, and turned away from the ballast controls. He fought toward her, forcing himself through the sludge that clung like wet cement. But he was too far. The black tide surged up her chest, her shoulders, her face, covering her eyes and sealing her last scream inside. And in moments, she was gone. Only a vaguely human-shaped silhouette of writhing black remained, and then even that was absorbed into the greater mass. Mark froze, staring at the empty space where she'd been. Rage etched itself into his features. Then he turned back toward the ballast controls and drove forward, chest deep in the living darkness. Every step he took was a battle against the crushing weight clinging to him, but he kept moving, inch by inch, until he reached the recessed panel. The manual ballast release was locked beneath a safety cover, a two-handed operation designed to keep accidents from happening. The sludge was lapping at his shoulders by then, coiling tighter with every passing second. He fought the locking mechanism with raw determination, metal grinding under his fingers until, finally, the cover tore open, exposing the bright red lever beneath. He turned his head toward the safe room, his eyes locking onto mine through the thick, pressure-rated glass. Even at this distance, the truth was written in his expression. Pulling that lever would save me, maybe save the ship. But he wasn't coming back. "Stay hidden until you reach the surface," he bellowed, the words faint through the steel and glass. "Don't let them bury this." Then he gripped the lever with both hands and heaved, throwing every last shred of strength into the motion until it slammed home with a heavy, final click. The ship convulsed, deep metallic tremors rippled through the hull as the ballast tanks dumped their contents in a roaring, unseen torrent, thousands of gallons of seawater erupting from the belly of the vessel. The sudden loss of weight tore us free from the abyss's grip. The floor beneath me pitched violently as the Blackwater Sentinel began its uncontrolled surge toward the surface. The sludge reacted instantly, writhing like a living nerve ending. It lashed around Mark, swallowing him whole in a single fluid movement. One moment he was there, shoulders set, defying it. The next, he was gone, consumed beneath a tide of black that surged and then flattened, spreading back across the corridor as if nothing had ever stood there. But his words wouldn't leave me. They hammered in my mind as the ship tore upward through the water column, every second a gamble against pressure and speed. Without the computers to meter our ascent, we were rising far too fast. The hull moaned and shuddered into the shifting strain, rivets groaning as metal plates flexed and expanded in protest. Through the porthole, I could see the sludge flooding the ship's innards, gliding through corridors and chambers like blackened seawater. Yet it didn't flow with the ship's movement. It defied it. The stuff crawled upward along bulkheads, pooled against gravity, and funneled itself toward one target: the safe room. It began probing at the seals, tendrils sliding across the reinforced doorframe with deliberate, searching movements. Wet, slick noises whispered through the steel as it tested for weakness, again and again, never tiring. But the seals held, although the siege never stopped. For hours it pressed and slid, a patient predator certain its last meal was trapped inside. The temperature inside the safe room started to plummet as we clawed our way up through the ocean's cold layers. Down deep, the water had hovered just above freezing, but my body heat and the chamber's insulation had kept things bearable. Now, with the pressure shifting and the ship's busted environmental systems letting cold bleed through every crack, the air turned sharp and biting. I grabbed an emergency blanket from the supply locker and wrapped it tight around myself, sliding down against the back wall, far from the porthole. I couldn't face what was happening outside. Still, the relentless wet slosh of that sludge creeping through the ship haunted every second. It was everywhere, flowing through every compartment, swallowing everything in its path. Hours dragged on. I rationed the sealed water, taking tiny sips, trying to hold on to what little warmth I had left. The safe room's air recycling kept the oxygen flowing, but beyond these walls the rest of the vessel was dying, systems offline and useless. No clocks, no depth gauges, just the groan of metal bending under changing pressure. The hull's creak softened as we rose, a cruel reminder that the crushing weight was easing, but the surface was still miles away. Fatigue clawed at me. Sleep came in shards, broken by sharp snaps and slithering sounds from beyond the door. Sometimes the hull settling, sometimes the sludge probing harder, like it knew I was weakening. Nearly 18 hours after Mark had slammed that ballast lever, the ship's motion shifted. The steady, unforgiving push of ascent gave way to a sickening roll. We'd broken the ocean's surface. Part 5. The Blackwater Sentinel was back in the light, hauling me, and whatever that black nightmare was, up into the world of sun and air. But I was still trapped in this coffin, the sludge prowling the halls outside, waiting, patient. Opening the door wasn't survival, it was death. I counted breaths in the darkness, each inhale a fragile thread holding me to life. We'd returned to the world above, alive, but still caught in the shadow of the thing that had killed us all. The ship's rolling rocked a mix of relief and raw terror through me. Relief, because we'd clawed out of that crushing dark where the black mass had swallowed my team whole. Terror, because I was still locked inside a ghost ship, twisted and invaded by something that shredded every rule of physics I'd ever trusted. I pressed my ear to the safe room door, straining for any movement in the dead corridors beyond. That slick, sliding sound, the sludge's crawl that had haunted me during the climb, was gone. No more probing, no more wet exploration of the ship's guts. The silence wasn't peace, though. It was a weight, just as unnatural as the noises had been. 2 long hours dragged by before I could summon the nerve to crack the chamber door open. My hands trembled, wrestling the heavy wheel locks, grinding steel, roaring in the tight space. With a hiss of shifting pressure, the seals gave way. The hallway beyond was a graveyard, empty, not just free of the black sludge, but stripped bare of everything. Where thick dark rivers had once crept along walls and floors, only scars remained. Black stains smeared across every surface, like burn marks scorched deep into metal, a twisted map of destruction. I picked my way through the ship's hollow shell, hunting for any sign of my lost crew. Bodies, gear, anything. The equipment bay where Caitlin and I had worked was gutted, instruments melted or shattered into unrecognizable wrecks. Black veins splattered the walls, twisting like lightning or veins pulsing with dark light. The lower decks were worse. Bulkheads eaten away, massive holes yawning in the hull that should have flooded us straight back to the abyss. But somehow the ship still floated, defied death, buoyed by some cruel force beyond understanding. No trace of Mark, Caitlin, James, Robert, or anyone else. No bodies, no gear. The sludge had swallowed everything living, leaving behind only the hollow bones of this sinking nightmare. The bridge was the last stop. Navigation system smashed, their screens cracked and dead. The radio was a twisted mess of wires and molten plastic. The emergency beacon, well, it had survived. The red switch glowed under the flickering emergency lights like a fragile promise. My fingers shook as I slammed it down. The familiar electronic whine blasted out, sending our position and a desperate SOS into the void. For the first time since the abyss, the sound was normal, almost like hope. Exhaustion slammed into me like a freight train. The adrenaline that had kept me sharp during the brutal ascent had vanished now, leaving behind a hollow ache deep in my bones and the sick truth. I hadn't eaten or drunk anything real in over a day. My legs buckled, and I crumpled against the beacon panel, my body finally folding under the weight of surviving the impossible. My mouth felt like sandpaper, lips cracked and raw, swallowing now a razor-sharp pain. The emergency water rations had stretched further than I thought possible, but after almost 26 hours of careful sips, I was running on empty. The galley might have more supplies, but I was too drained to crawl that far. I lay on the cold bridge floor, the steady electronic pulse of the emergency beacon cutting through the silence. Outside, the ship rolled gently on real ocean waves, not the alien nightmare we'd escaped from deep beneath the surface. Those normal sounds became my lifeline, tethering me back to a world that made sense. 6 hours dragged by before the low hum of engines broke the quiet. The sound grew sharp and clear, large military propellers thrumming through the water, unmistakable. A US Navy vessel, no doubt, judging by the precision and coordinated approach. Voices floated across the waves, calm, professional commands and status checks that told me this wasn't some random passerby, but a full-on rescue operation. Someone had picked up our beacon and sent the cavalry. The boarding team stormed through the damaged corridors, boots heavy and echoing, calling out room clearances and structural reports, the cold language of soldiers on a mission. "Survivor located on the bridge," came the sharp call. 2 sailors in navy blues lifted me carefully, muscles weak and uncooperative. They wrapped me tight in thermal blankets and hauled me across to their ship, where a medical officer was ready with IV fluids and emergency gear. The medical bay was clean, bright, sterile, the perfect contrast to the hell we'd come from. Machines beeped, lights shone steady, and people moved with calm, practiced precision. After the alien terror of the abyss, this routine, clinical order felt like stepping back into civilization itself. The medical officer, a serious woman with lieutenant's bars and steady hands, hooked me up to an IV drip, tracking my vitals with sharp eyes while asking measured questions about what I'd been through. She treated my severe dehydration with cold efficiency, adjusting the fluids as my body greedily drank in every drop. but her questions went deeper than just medicine. She wanted details about the rest of the crew, what went down during our descent, how I was the only one left breathing. And her questions weren't just routine. They carried the weight of someone who'd been briefed beyond emergency medicine. There were 7 others aboard, I told her, the IV drip clearing the fog in my head. The captain, my research partner, the engineering crew, all dead. She exchanged a sharp look with the Navy officer standing quietly at the edge of the medbay, and that glance spoke volumes, more than simple concern for missing personnel. What happened to them? She asked, voice steady but focused. I tried to put it into words, about the black sludge, how it moved with a cold, calculated intelligence, swallowing my team one by one. Even as I spoke, the story felt insane, like the ramblings of someone trapped too long in a broken coffin beneath the ocean. It came from the ocean floor, I said, watching their faces for any flicker of understanding or belief. It wasn't just alive. It was hunting us, eating through metal, defying gravity, killing anyone it touched. The medic kept working in silence, but I caught another loaded glance between her and the Navy officer. A light skepticism painted across their faces, like professionals listening to a survivor whose mind had fractured under trauma. Hallucinations aren't uncommon in severe oxygen deprivation and dehydration, the medic said softly. Add in the psychological shock of losing your team in a catastrophic accident, well, your mind might have filled in gaps with explanations too overwhelming to face. I'm not hallucinating, I snapped, though their doubt made me second-guess everything I'd seen. The sludge was real. It had killed them. The Navy officer stepped forward, his expression sympathetic but unyielding. We've examined your vessel. Major hull breach, catastrophic system failures. Your colleagues most likely died when the ship lost pressure during descent. You survived because you made it to the emergency safe room before it all went to hell. Well, their version made sense. Logical, based on the hard evidence. My story about intelligent black sludge, it sounded like the wild hallucination of someone whose mind had cracked under pressure. Even I started wondering if the dehydration and isolation had twisted my memories of that nightmare beneath the waves. Well, they flew me out to a military hospital in Hawaii, where I spent 3 days locked under medical watch, trying to piece myself back together. The hospital was slick and state-of-the-art, staffed with sharp doctors who handled my battered body with cold, efficient professionalism. But the guards outside my door told a different story, armed, watchful, claiming to protect me, but the weight of their presence screamed containment. No phone, no internet, no contact with the outside world. The docs called it a precaution during recovery, but the silence felt engineered, like they were quarantining me before they figured out what to do with my story. On day 3, after they pronounced me physically patched up and psychologically stable, a man showed up in a sharp black suit. Name's Duncan Miller, he said, from some government outfit I'd never heard of. He carried a thick folder and wore a look that promised this wasn't a casual chat. He pulled up a chair next to my bed, calm and practiced, like he'd done this 1,000 times before. Well, his presence swallowed the sterile hospital room whole, making those armed guards outside look like background noise. It was Hartshorn, he said, flipping open that folder to documents I couldn't make out from where I lay. We need to talk about what went down on the Blackwater Sentinel. Miller's suit was sharp, tailored to perfection, someone who moved through government halls and secret briefings like it was second nature. And the folder in his hands looked like it held a lifetime of secrets, and the careful way he handled it made me think it probably did. I shifted uncomfortably in the hospital bed, feeling every inch the vulnerable patient. IV line hooked up, wearing a thin gown, at a serious disadvantage in this conversation. His face stayed neutral, but his eyes were cold, calculating, mastering the art of pulling answers from people who didn't want to talk. "Oh, before we start," he said, pulling out a thick sheaf of papers, "you need to understand the legal framework for this discussion." He laid the documents on my bed with deliberate precision, right where I could see the header, Confidentiality Agreement, Classified Operations Division. The bold letters seemed designed to intimidate. He leaned back, giving me time to stare down the dense official text. The first real barrier in a conversation I knew would change everything. The language was dense, cold, and loaded with threats, national security protocols, criminal penalties, words meant to crush any impulse to speak out. One part warned of prosecution under the Espionage Act. Another dangled financial ruin that could bankrupt me for life. The Blackwater Sentinel mission is classified far above your clearance level, Miss Hartshorn, Miller said, his tone flat like he was reading a script. Everything you experienced on that expedition is now national security. Talking about it with anyone unauthorized is a federal offense. When he spoke so casually, it was clear he'd delivered this spiel 100 times before, explaining cold facts rather than issuing warnings. But the threat underneath was sharp and unmistakable. The official record states your vessel suffered a catastrophic hull breach during descent, he went on, flipping through more papers. System failures caused progressive flooding that killed all crew but you. You survived by reaching the emergency pod, where you stayed until rescue. His version was clean, neat, and dead wrong. A tidy narrative meant to erase everything I knew. That's not what happened, I said, voice thinner than I wanted. There was something down there, something that killed them. Miller nodded with the practiced patience of someone who'd heard this before. He pulled out a series of photographs, spreading them across the bed like cards in a grim game. The pictures showed the Blackwater Sentinel being dragged by a huge military ship toward a fortified naval base. Cranes and hazmat-suited personnel swarmed the damaged hull, probing every inch with cold precision. Your vessel's under a study at a secure facility, Miller said as I scanned the images. Teams of engineers and specialists are analyzing the damage, trying to pinpoint what caused the failures. He pointed to shots of the ship's battered sections, places where the black sludge had chewed through metal and wrecked the hull's integrity. But in the photos, the damage looked like routine corrosion and fatigue, nothing like the impossible destruction I'd seen firsthand. The families of your crew have been notified, Miller added, voice final. They've received the official explanation and compensation packages. Their grieving has begun, based on what they've been told. The impact of Miller's words slammed into me like a gut punch. Caitlin's family was mourning a lie. Mark's kin had been told he'd died in some forgettable industrial accident. Nothing like the sacrifice I'd seen with my own eyes. They'd all been stripped of the truth, robbed of what really happened down there. I grabbed the confidentiality agreement, scanning through dense legal jargon laying out my obligation to keep everything sealed tight. It was a fortress of words crafted by national security lawyers who knew exactly how to scare the hell out of you. I'm not signing this, I said, shoving the papers back toward him. People deserve to know what's down there. Miller's face didn't flinch, but he slid the folder across and pulled out another batch of documents. This time, it was my life in black and white. Credit reports, work history, every financial thread unraveling over years. $47,000 in student loans, he read without mercy. Unemployed, no real prospects. Your sister Jennifer lost her job 6 months ago, behind on rent. Your mother's cancer bills wiped out the family savings. Oh, he rattled off every weak point, every crack in my life that had pushed me to jump at the chance for that goddamn expedition. He even knew about Jennifer's unemployment running out, the endless meds my mom had to take, the financial tightrope I was walking just to keep us afloat. We get it, Miller said, snapping the file shut with clinical calm. Money makes people do desperate things, but usually folks want to shield their families from pain. The threat was wrapped in professional courtesy, but there was no mistaking the message. Refuse to sign, and the fallout wouldn't just hit me, it would wreck my family's fragile stability too. He pulled a pen from his jacket, sliding it across the table next to the agreement. Your call, Miss Hartshorn. Though, just so you know, the Department of Education's got new policies on student loan forgiveness for folks who've gone through government-related trauma. Even the bribe was a threat in disguise. Sign and get relief. Refuse and watch my family crumble because of my stubbornness. I picked up the pen, its cold weight like iron shackles clamping around my wrist. Every stroke was another link locking me into silence for the rest of my life. But Jennifer's worn face flashed in my mind. Mom's worried eyes when she talked about pills piling up despite insurance. 2 minutes later, my name was scrawled across page after page, signing away my voice to whatever dark corner of the government Miller represented. Each signature slammed down like a small death, a piece of the truth buried under a mountain of official lies and national security red tape. Miller folded the papers back into his folder with practiced precision, tucking them alongside the photos and background files. He rose smoothly, straightening his suit jacket like a man who'd just closed the deal. "Thank you for your cooperation, Miss Hartshorn," he said, offering a stiff handshake. "Someone will contact you about your discharge." 2 days later, I was back in my Seattle apartment, parked on the same worn couch where I'd first read that cryptic email that dragged me into this nightmare. The trip from the depths of San Diego Harbor to this place felt like crossing worlds, but no amount of familiarity could scrub the horrors etched into my mind. My laptop set where I'd left it, the desktop glowing with a bright coral reef photo I'd snapped during grad school, so impossibly vibrant and peaceful, a cruel contrast to the abyssal nightmare I'd escaped. A new email pinged in my inbox from the Pacific Marine Research Institute's HR department. The subject line made my hands tremble. Employment opportunity. Senior marine biologist position. Well, the message laid out a dream job, everything I'd hoped for and more. Senior researcher status at a respected institute. Cutting-edge labs, a salary that promised to wipe out my student debt in under 2 years. Benefits, full health coverage, retirement plans, and research funds for any project I dared to chase. But there was a catch. Every research step, every finding would be under government scrutiny. Classified, vetted, and censored by federal agencies before anything ever saw the light of day in the scientific world. I stared at the screen, my face reflecting back, hollow and drained. I traded truth for comfort, sold my silence on the most important discovery humanity might ever make. Weeks passed, and I tried convincing myself it was the practical path. Jennifer landed a new job. The student loan forgiveness Miller promised kicked in. Mom's medical bills became bearable under my new insurance. Everything in my world got better, except the burning knowledge that gnawed at me every night when I shut my eyes. That black sludge haunted my every waking second. During dead quiet stretches at work, sifting through dull coral biology reports, my mind kept snapping back to how that black mess moved, like it had a brain. How it stalked through the ship's halls, swallowing up my teammates without leaving a damn thing behind. Miller's photos showed the Blackwater Sentinel being dragged off to some secret lab for study. What about Caitlin's samples? Was that nightmare still alive, locked away in a government vault, poked at by clueless scientists? Or had it been dumped back into the ocean, left to fester and multiply until the next poor soul stumbled on it? The official story about a hull breach and pressure failure got churned out in maritime safety reports, just warnings about the dangers of poking around deep, unknown waters. My colleagues, honored as victims of a workplace accident, their true bravery buried under piles of classified files and corporate legal shields. 3 months after I hit Seattle, I opened an anonymous account on some dark web forum dedicated to government cover-ups and weird shit. Most users were conspiracy nuts or attention junkies, but it was the only place I could spill the truth without risking my silence deal. And so, I wrote it all out. The sketchy expedition invite, the descent into the trench, the impossible black sludge hunting us down and erasing my team. It read like sci-fi to anyone who hadn't been through hell. And predictably, the replies were what I expected. Skeptics, calls for proof, and accusations that I was spinning fiction for internet points. A few folks claimed similar brush-ups with weird ocean shit, but their tales were vague and half-baked, sounding more like cries for attention than real encounters. Nobody believed me, and that was exactly what Miller's people wanted. Let me keep my memories so the story sounded nuts, so anyone who heard it would write me off as crazy. Meanwhile, the official line gave everyone a neat, logical explanation to cling to. Still, I kept posting, adding bits, unpacking details as they came back to me. somewhere deep in the Pacific, down in uncharted trenches, something old and hungry waits. It killed 7 people with cold efficiency, and I'd survived by luck, and because Mark had made the ultimate sacrifice. That black sludge is still down there, patient, smart, lurking where no human is supposed to go. And no matter the secrecy, the cushy job, the financial safety net that keeps me quiet, I know one day another ship will get the same mysterious coordinates, the same offer they can't refuse. And when that happens, I'll be the only one left who knows exactly what hell they're sailing straight into. So today's footage is another one that I shot many years ago. This one I was still living in Istanbul, and this is the Marmara Sea. So I'm heading towards Istanbul here. I'm coming from, we had a little summer place we used to stay at in a city called Yalova. So it takes about an hour to get across in the ferry. So it's always nice going. So I was getting away from the big city, but I don't know, quite a nice view coming back as well. So I hope you enjoyed those visuals. That's from about 6-7 years ago, I think. I don't have many clips like that left. I was using them a lot in the past, but yeah, it was the closest I had to deep sea, whatever, the theme of this story. So yeah, didn't totally fit, but you know what I was trying to do. Right, hope you enjoyed that one tonight. Thoughts, feelings, anything else you want to say in the comment section below the video. And as ever, I'll do my best to join in the conversation. That was a long one. Recorded that all in one go. Brain's a little bit fried. I went out for a ride on the bike between that and recording this little end monologue, so you can tell I'm a little bit refreshed, hopefully. All right, that's enough for tonight. Back again tomorrow with a podcast, and then back again here on Wednesday with something like this. Till the next time, my dear friends, very, very good sleep, and see you again soon.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.